"Ma'am, don't get in the car." The plea sliced through the afternoon calm, a raw and desperate edge to the words. Benny Langston paused, her manicured hand resting on the polished handle of her limousine, her entire world tilting on its axis for a moment. The city's persistent hum, the far-off wail of sirens, the low rumble of traffic, it all seemed to fade into an unnerving silence, leaving only that frayed, terrified voice hanging in the air. Two men in sharp, dark suits, key members of her security team, moved with a fluid, synchronized purpose. They closed in on the source of the disruption, a man in a simple gray janitor's uniform, his dark face pale and gleaming with sweat. He had burst out of a service entrance, an unexpected ghost emerging from the towering steel and glass facade of Langston Holdings. His eyes were wide, locked on her, silently begging. "Stay back!" one of the guards, Obasi Ndlovu, commanded, his voice a deep, resonant growl. He positioned himself as a solid barrier between Abeni and the janitor. The other guard seized the man, spinning him around and pinning him against the cool limestone wall of the tower. The janitor's breath escaped in a pained grunt as a ring of keys clattered onto the pavement. "Don't let her get in," he gasped, twisting his neck to keep his desperate gaze fixed on Abeni. "Please, you can't." Abeni's initial shock quickly soured into a cold, sharp irritation. She was already 12 minutes late for a meeting of immense importance, one that could not be moved. Its secrecy was paramount. This interruption was an unacceptable breach, a failure of protocol. "Obasi, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice possessing the crisp, cutting authority of a CEO. She withdrew her hand from the car door as if it had suddenly become superheated. "Who is this man?" "Laken Cole, ma'am," Obasi replied, his sharp eyes methodically scanning the street, the rooftops of adjacent buildings, every single parked vehicle. His hand instinctively drifted toward the inside of his jacket. "He works maintenance, the night crew. He's clearly unstable." The second guard grunted in agreement, wrenching Lekin's arms forcefully behind his back. "No!" Lacan's voice cracked with strain. "Just listen to me for 1 second. The car, it isn't safe." That single word hung in the air. Safe. In Abeni Langston's universe, it was a concept filtered through a dozen layers of risk analysis and corporate counter-espionage. But when shouted by a frantic janitor on a city sidewalk, it carried only one terrible implication. Obasi's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the sleek black limousine and then back at Lacan's terrified face. Cold, swift protocol took over. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle, now." His tone was no longer a suggestion. He signaled to the other guard. "Lock it down. Get the police. Get the bomb squad. Full perimeter." Abeni's jaw tightened. "A bomb? Obasi, this is absurd. The man is clearly unwell." "Maybe, ma'am," Obasi said, gently but firmly guiding her back toward the building's grand marble entrance. "But we aren't paid to take chances on maybe." Within minutes, the street was a swirling vortex of red and blue lights. Police cruisers screeched to a halt, sealing off both ends of the block to form a makeshift barricade. A crowd of onlookers began to gather, their phones held high. Abeni stood just inside the lobby, watching the chaotic scene unfold through the thick plate glass. Her meticulously structured afternoon was now a pile of smoldering ruins. Her driver had been ordered out of the car and stood pale-faced behind a police line. Laken Cole was on his knees on the sidewalk, his hands cuffed behind his back, 2 officers standing over him. He wasn't fighting anymore. He simply stared at the black limousine, which now sat isolated in the middle of the cordoned-off street like a modern tomb. He had stopped her. That was all that mattered. But as the first member of the bomb squad appeared in heavy protective gear, a cold dread began to seep into him. He hadn't considered this part. He hadn't thought beyond the singular blinding need to stop that car door from closing. His thoughts flew to his daughter, Maya. He could picture her perfectly, sitting by the window of their small apartment, her sketchbook resting on her lap. He saw the subtle tremor in her hand as she drew, a cruel symptom of the disease that was stealing her from him, cell by cell. He remembered the last visit to the doctor, the hushed, pitying tone. "The progression is faster than we anticipated, Mr. Cole. We're running out of options." That was a lie. There was an option, a new one. A cure, they were calling it. A miracle trial happening right here. He'd seen the name on the shredded papers he had painstakingly taped back together under the dim light of a custodial closet, his hands shaking. He had seen the name of the trial, the lead researcher, and the name of the primary test subject. His blood had run cold. A low metallic groan snapped him back to the present. A bomb disposal robot was rolling toward the limousine. It extended a mechanical arm, its camera eyes swiveling to examine the undercarriage. Abeni watched, her arms crossed, a knot of pure fury tightening in her stomach. The meeting was at a private airfield. The flight was in less than an hour. She was meant to be there to witness the culmination of 2 years of secret, off-the-books funding. The moment she would finally see her brother again. She looked over at the janitor. His head was bowed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't look like a fanatic. He looked like a man drowning. An hour later, the verdict came in. The car was clean. Every panel, every wire, every inch of the chassis had been swept. There was no bomb, there was no threat, there was nothing. The police tape came down, the crowds dispersed, the bomb squad packed up their gear. The only things left were the lingering echo of sirens and Abeni Langston's cold, undiluted rage. The 2 officers pulled Lakin to his feet. "You're looking at a felony, pal," one of them said. "Making a false report, inciting panic. The DA is going to have a field day with you." They were about to lead him to a cruiser when Abeni stepped out of the lobby. Her heels clicked on the pavement with the sharp, deliberate rhythm of a ticking clock. Obasi moved to her side. "Ma'am, we'll handle this." "No," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She stopped directly in front of Lakan, her gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. The officers paused, waiting. She looked at this man, this nobody, this ghost from the night shift who had just cost her something immeasurably important. She didn't see a madman. She saw a terror that was too specific, too real, and she needed to know why. She dismissed the officers with a subtle flick of her eyes. They stepped back, but remained close. "You have 5 seconds, Abeni said, her voice barely a whisper, but carrying the full force of her power. "You will tell me why you just destroyed my day, and if I don't believe you, I will personally see to it that I destroy the rest of your life." Lakin's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a drum of sheer panic. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, bored into him. This was it. The moment where his life either ended or took a turn so sharp he couldn't imagine the road ahead. He couldn't tell her everything, the shredded papers, the late-night research, the web of deceit he'd barely begun to untangle. It would sound like the ravings of a madman. He needed one thing, one key to unlock the door of her fury and prove this wasn't random. His throat felt like sandpaper. He swallowed, the sound loud in the sudden silence. "Neurosynaptic decay syndrome," he breathed, the words clumsy and foreign in his own mouth. For the first time since he'd met her gaze, Abeni Langston flinched. It was imperceptible to anyone else, a slight widening of her eyes, a fractional tightening of her lips. But to Lakin, who had staked his entire world on this one moment, it was like a canyon opening at his feet. He had hit the target. Her composure, a fortress built over a lifetime, resealed itself in an instant. But the crack had shown. She knew. She knew exactly what he was talking about. That clinical, obscure name was a secret she had buried under layers of corporate firewalls, non-disclosure agreements, and profound personal pain. To hear it spoken by a janitor on a city street was like having a ghost whisper in her ear. She turned to the police officers, her tone shifting back to command. "This is a corporate security matter now, an internal one. I will handle Mr. Cole's debriefing. You can release him into the custody of my security chief." The officer frowned. Ma'am, he committed a crime. We can't just— You can, and you will. Abeni cut in, her voice leaving no room for argument. Langston Holdings will not be pressing charges. We will, however, provide the city with a generous donation to the Police Benevolent Fund to compensate for the resources expended this afternoon. Send the paperwork to my legal department. It wasn't a request. It was a transaction. The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then nodded. The cuffs were unlocked. Lekan rubbed his wrists, the raw red marks a testament to how close he'd come to the edge. Obasi, Abeni said without looking at him, take Mr. Cole to the 50th floor conference room. He is not to speak to anyone. He is not to leave. Wait with him until I arrive. Yes, ma'am. Obasi's hand rested lightly on Lekan's elbow. The touch wasn't rough, but it was inescapable. As Obasi led him back into the gleaming lobby of the tower, Lekan felt a new kind of fear. He was no longer a citizen in the hands of the law. He was an asset, a problem, a piece of corporate intelligence in the hands of Abeni Langston. He didn't know which was worse. The 50th floor conference room was a glass box in the sky. Windows on 3 sides offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling map of lights and shadows. The table was a single massive slab of obsidian black marble, polished to a mirror finish. Lekan felt like a bug under a microscope. Obasi stood by the door, silent and motionless as a statue. An hour passed, then another. Lekan's mind raced. He thought of Maya, alone in their apartment, probably watching cartoons, blissfully unaware of the hurricane her father had walked into. He had to call her, let her know he'd be late. He looked at Obasi. Can I use my phone? He asked. My daughter? No, Obasi said flatly. The door finally opened. Abeni Langston swept in, her personal assistant trailing her with a tablet. She dismissed the assistant with a nod. The door clicked shut, leaving the 3 of them in the sterile silence of the room. She didn't sit. She prowled the perimeter, her heels silent on the plush carpet. Lekan remained standing, acutely aware of the grime on his uniform, the sweat on his brow, the vast chasm between their 2 worlds. Neurosynaptic decay syndrome, she began, her voice calm, controlled. It's exceptionally rare. Fewer than 2,000 diagnosed cases worldwide. Tell me, Mr. Cole, how a man who mops floors for a living became an expert in boutique neurology. Lekan's hands trembled. He clasped them behind his back. My daughter, Maya. She was diagnosed 6 months ago. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Abeni stopped her pacing and turned to face him fully. He could see the conflict in her eyes. The CEO assessing a threat. The woman hearing an echo of her own private hell. She's 7, Lekan continued, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer suppress. She loves to draw. Her hands have started to shake. The doctor said it's progressing. They said there's nothing they can do. He saw a flicker of something in her expression, not pity, but a shared, bleak understanding. He had to press on. I know about the trial, he said, his voice dropping. The one you're funding. The Langston Initiative. I know you think you've found a cure. Abeni's face went blank, her expression unreadable. The source of your information is of great interest to me. I found things. Papers. He couldn't admit he'd pieced them together from a shredder bin. Not yet. I saw the name of the lead subject in the final phase. Your brother, Kalichi Langston. Her jaw tightened. You have been busy, Mr. Cole. I was desperate, he shot back, a surge of courage rising with his fear. Wouldn't you be? A cure is being developed in the very building I work in. A cure for the thing that's killing my little girl. I had to know more. And what you know prompted you to cause a citywide panic and make me miss the most important meeting of my life. Yes. Lekan took a step forward, Obasi tensed by the door. Because it's not a cure. It's a lie. The treatment, it doesn't work. It makes it worse. I saw the preliminary data, the mortality rates they buried in the appendices. They're not saving your brother, Ms. Langston. They're using him. Abini stared at him, her mind racing, processing, analyzing. Was this an elaborate corporate sabotage attempt? Was he a pawn for a rival company? Or was he something far more dangerous, a desperate father who had stumbled upon a truth she herself had refused to see? She had poured $1 billion of her personal fortune into this project. She had trusted Dr. Adeoye. She had believed in the miracle because she had to. She walked to the head of the table and finally sat, gesturing for him to take a chair opposite her. The distance between them felt like miles. "You say you have a daughter," she said, her tone shifting, becoming less of an interrogator and more of a strategist. "I'm going to need her medical records, her full diagnostic history, everything." Lekin's blood ran cold. "Why? She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," Abeni corrected him, her eyes locking onto his. "You've made an extraordinary claim, Mr. Cole. A dangerous one. I need to know if the foundation of your story is built on rock or on sand." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. "You are not leaving this building. My people will be looking into every aspect of your life, starting with your daughter. If you are telling me the truth, we have a mutual interest. But if you are lying," she paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room, "then you have made an enemy you cannot possibly comprehend." The silence in the glass cage was absolute. Lekin sat at the obsidian table, his reflection a tired, distorted stranger staring back at him. He was a prisoner, not in a jail cell with bars, but in a sky-high monument to a world he didn't belong in, his fate hanging on the whims of a woman who could erase him with a single phone call. Every minute that ticked by was a minute he wasn't with Maya. Was she home from school yet? Had Mama Ama Mensa next door given her the afternoon snack he'd left? Did she notice he hadn't called? The thought was a physical pain, sharper than the ache in his wrists. In her penthouse office 5 floors above, Abeni Langston moved with cold purpose. The janitor's desperate, ragged confession had bypassed her corporate defenses and struck something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Doubt. "I want everything on Lekin Cole," she told Obasi over the intercom, her voice devoid of emotion. "Employment history, credit score, social media, known associates. I want to know what he eats for breakfast. And I want his daughter's medical file, not a summary, the entire chart. Have our legal team make the request directly to the Pediatric Neurology Department at Mercy General Teaching Hospital. Use my name. I want it in 1 hour." "And Mr. Cole?" Obasi's voice crackled back. "He stays where he is. No calls, no contact. He is a black box. I need to know what's inside before I decide to open it." The machine of Langston Holdings, once aimed at Lekan, now focused on his life story. It was brutally efficient. Within 45 minutes, a series of encrypted files arrived on Abini's tablet. She bypassed the financial data and went straight to the medical report. Patient: Maya Cole, age 7. Diagnosis: neurosynaptic decay syndrome, stage 2. Abeni's breath caught. She read through the neurologist's notes, the clinical language a stark, sterile description of a nightmare she knew all too well. Patient presence, with increased distal tremors, observable decline in fine motor skills. Prognosis is aggressive. It was a mirror of the report she received weekly about her brother, Kelechi. The foundation of Lekin Cole's story wasn't sand. It was bedrock. He wasn't lying. The knowledge didn't bring relief, only a colder, more profound sense of dread. If he was telling the truth about his daughter, what if he was also telling the truth about the cure? Down on the 50th floor, Lakan was pacing. The anxiety was a living thing inside him, clawing at his insides. He had to talk to Maya. He approached the door where Obasi stood, an immovable object. "Please," Lacan said, his voice cracking. I need to call my daughter. She'll be worried. She's just a little girl. Just 2 minutes. You can listen to every word. Obasi's expression was unreadable, but he tapped his earpiece. Ma'am, Cole is requesting a call to his daughter. The line was silent for a moment. Then Abeni's voice came through, clipped and precise. Put it on speaker. Obasi produced a phone and dialed the number Lekin gave him. After 2 rings, Maya's small voice answered, Daddy? A wave of relief so powerful it made Lekin dizzy washed over him. Hey, sweet pea, it's me. Daddy, where are you? You didn't call after school. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against the cool glass of the window. The lie felt like acid on his tongue. I know, baby. I'm so sorry. It's a crazy night at work. One of the big water pipes broke and it's a huge mess. I have to work a double shift to help clean it up. Uh-oh, she said, her voice small. Will you be home for bedtime stories? The simple question was a knife in his heart. I'm going to try, Maya. I'm going to try really, really hard. Did you have your snack? Yes, and I did my homework. I drew a picture of a castle for you. It has a big gate to keep the monsters out. Lekin choked back a sob, turning it into a cough. That sounds amazing, sweet pea. You keep that gate strong for me, okay? Okay, Daddy, I love you. I love you more, Maya. Be good for Mama Amma. I'll call you as soon as I can. He hung up, his hand trembling. He slid down the wall to the floor, burying his face in his hands, the facade of strength crumbling into dust. He was unaware of the CEO 5 floors up, listening to the entire exchange, the sterile silence of her office filled with the sound of a father's breaking heart. Abeni switched off the intercom. The conversation had done what no financial report or background check could. It had made Lekin Cole real. He wasn't a corporate threat. He was a man fighting the same war she was, only with none of her resources. She turned to her secure terminal and pulled up the file on the Langston Initiative. She scrolled past the glossy progress reports from Dr. Alistair F. Adeoye, past the fabricated projections of success. Her eyes scanned the financials, the endless lists of acquisitions for the research facility, chemicals, lab equipment, containment units, and a name she had approved months ago, but never questioned. A consulting payment to a firm called Rune Analytics. A quick encrypted search brought up the company's file. It was a shell corporation, and its sole proprietor was a doctor, Corbin V. Okoro, a biochemist who had lost his license 5 years earlier for falsifying clinical trial data, a fact Dr. Adeoye had failed to mention. Her blood ran cold. She had been so blinded by hope, so desperate for a miracle, that she had ignored the red flags, the little inconsistencies. Adeoye's resistance to a third-party audit, which he dismissed as unnecessary delays that Kalechi can't afford. She looked at a photo on her desk, a younger version of herself and her brother, smiling on a sailboat, the sun in their hair, before the diagnosis, before the world had shrunk to hospital rooms and grim prognoses. The janitor was right. They weren't saving him. They were using him. Her finger hovered over the intercom button to call Obasi, but this required a different touch. She picked up her direct encrypted line to Dr. Adeoye's private office at the research facility. He answered on the first ring, his voice smooth as silk. Abeni, I was beginning to worry. I trust the meeting was... It was postponed, she said, her voice a chip of ice. She didn't give him time to respond. Alistair, I'm reviewing the Q3 expenditure reports. A payment was flagged for a consultant, or Rune Analytics. I wasn't aware we had an outside firm analyzing the data. Can you clarify Dr. Corbin V. Okoro's role in the trial? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It lasted only 3 seconds, but in that space, Abeni heard everything. The frantic search for a lie, the shock of being caught, the cold, sharp clang of a trap springing shut. Finally, Adeoye's voice came back, strained and suddenly stripped of its easy charm. Corbin Okoro, that must be a clerical error. He has no formal role. He's an old colleague I occasionally consult for his historical perspective. His historical perspective on falsifying data? Abeni asked, letting the question hang in the air, cold and deadly. Dr. Adeoye sputtered on the other end of the line, a rush of indignant protests tumbling out. Falsifying data? That man was a victim of academic politics. I will not have my integrity questioned, Abeni, not after everything I've done for your family. Your integrity is no longer a topic of discussion, Alistair, Abeni said, her voice dropping to absolute zero. It is now evidence. You will not touch the facility servers. You will not delete a single file, and if you go anywhere near my brother, I will bring the full weight of the federal government down on you so fast your head will spin. Am I clear? She didn't wait for an answer. She ended the call, the silence in her office ringing with the finality of a death sentence. The board was set. The enemy was flushed from the shadows. Now, she had to move faster than him. She took her private elevator down to the 50th floor. When she entered the glass-walled conference room, Lacan was on his feet, pacing like a caged animal. He looked up as she entered, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear. The power dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer just a suspect, and she was no longer just his accuser. They were two people on opposite sides of a canyon, now staring at the same monster on the other side. You were right, she said, the words costing her a piece of her pride. She slid her tablet across the polished marble table. On the screen was the file for Rune Analytics and the damning photo of Dr. Corbin V. Okoro. Dr. Adeoye has been paying a disgraced researcher who was barred for faking trial results. He panicked when I confronted him just now. He lied. Lacan stared at the screen, then back at her. The validation did little to ease the terror in his eyes. It only confirmed the depth of the danger they were in. He's going to move, Lacan stated, his voice barely a whisper. He's going to accelerate his timeline. Yes, Abeni affirmed, her own voice tight. The meeting you forced me to miss today, it was to witness the final results and authorize the final transfer of funds. Once that money is in his account, he and his data are gone. And my brother... She couldn't finish the sentence. Lacan thought of the shredded documents, the fragments of sentences he'd pieced together. A phrase he hadn't understood at the time suddenly clicked into place. Post-transfer asset liquidation. They weren't talking about stocks. They were talking about her brother. He's going to kill him, Lacan said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. To bury the proof that the cure was a fraud. Abeni nodded, her jaw tight. Which means we have hours, maybe less. I need to know everything you saw, every word, every name. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small. For the first time, Lacan felt a surge of agency. He wasn't powerless anymore. He was the only other person who knew a piece of the truth. First, you have to promise me something. Abeni raised an eyebrow. My daughter, Lacan said, his voice firm, unwavering. If I help you, if we do this, you have to promise me you will protect her no matter what happens. Abeni studied his face, seeing the unshakable resolve of a father, a resolve she was just beginning to understand in herself. Your daughter's safety is non-negotiable, she said, her tone softening for the first time. If we expose this, I will personally fund her treatment with a legitimate medical team, wherever in the world we have to go. You have my word. As a woman, not as a CEO. It was a vow, it was enough. Lacan recounted every detail he could remember. Offshore bank account numbers, chemical formulas that didn't match public patents, and the name of a transport company scheduled for a medical waste disposal pickup from the facility's back dock at 6 a.m. the next morning. It's not waste, Abeni murmured, her face pale. It's caliche. She sprang into action, her mind a whirlwind of strategy. Obasi, she barked into her intercom, get the jet ready for Black Ridge Airfield. And I need full schematics for the Akachi Research Center. Architectural, security, and HVAC. Now. She turned back to Lacan. I can get a team of federal marshals there, but it will take a judge, warrants. It could take 12 hours. We don't have 12 hours. Adeoye will be gone by then. We have to get in tonight. They'll be watching the main entrance, Lacan said, his mind already piecing things together. The gates, the cameras. They'll expect a frontal assault. Obasi entered with a tablet, projecting the facility's intricate blueprints onto a screen that descended from the ceiling. It was a fortress, a single access road, electrified perimeter fencing, motion sensors. A full tactical assault would be a siege. Ma'am, Obasi said gravely, it's impossible on this timeline. Lacan stepped closer to the screen, his eyes scanning not the main structures but the spaces in between. His finger landed on a small, insignificant-looking icon on the far side of the compound. What is that? Abeni asked. An industrial sanitation conduit, Lacan answered, his voice gaining confidence. For acidic chemical runoff from the main lab. It's shielded, reinforced, and it empties into a drainage culvert half a mile outside the perimeter fence. Obasi frowned. That conduit would be less than 30 inches wide, and it would be connected directly to their waste processing. It's a suicide run. Not if their waste processing isn't active, Lacan countered. The documents I saw had a maintenance schedule. The primary filtration system is shut down for cleaning every night between 2 and 4 a.m. They wouldn't be running experiments then. To save on power, they'd put the lab in standby. Abeni stared at him, a flicker of awe in her eyes. He saw the building not as a fortress, but as a network of vulnerabilities. He saw it the way a janitor would. You're saying we could get inside through a sewer pipe? She said. I'm saying, Lacan corrected her gently, that he'll be watching the front door for a CEO. He'll never be watching the drains for a janitor. A heavy silence filled the room. The plan was insane. It was reckless. It was the only chance they had. Abeni looked from the schematic to Lacan's determined face, then to Obasi. Get the gear, she commanded. We're going in. And Mr. Cole is coming with us. The jet ascended into the night, a silent ghost leaving the city's glittering grid behind. Lacan sat stiffly in a cream-colored leather seat that cost more than his car, the janitor's uniform feeling like a costume in this world of polished wood and silent efficiency. Across from him, Abeni Langston had shed her CEO persona and was now a field commander, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of the schematics on her tablet. Obasi sat beside her, methodically checking a set of compact high-tech gear. The silence on the plane was heavy, filled with the unspoken fear and desperate hope of their mission. Lacan's world had been upended in less than 12 hours. He clutched the armrests and thought of Maya. He pictured her drawing of the castle, the gate meant to keep monsters out. Tonight, he was walking through the gate to face them. Abeni looked up, her gaze analytical, but no longer hostile. Tell me about her, she said, her voice quiet, cutting through the engine's hum. Lacan blinked. Who? Maya, Abeni clarified. You're risking your life. I want to know why. He swallowed, the lump in his throat feeling like a stone. She's bright, he began, his voice rough. She's funny. She asks a million questions. Her favorite color is yellow, the color of the sun right when it wakes up. She wants to be an astronomer, says she wants to discover a new star and name it after her mom. He trailed off, the memory of his late wife a sudden, sharp ache. Abeni didn't offer pity. She just listened. My brother, Kelechi, she said, her voice dropping so low Lacan had to strain to hear it. He used to sail. He loved the ocean. He said it was the only place where you could feel how big the world was and how small your problems were. The last time we spoke, he told me he just wanted to feel the sun on his face one more time, without feeling like he was fading away. In that moment, they weren't a CEO and a janitor. They were just two people bound by the same cruel disease, sharing stories of the people they were trying to save. An hour later, the luxury of the jet was a distant memory, replaced by the damp chill of a forest floor. They moved in tactical silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves. Then they saw it. A high chain-link fence topped with razor wire, and beyond it, the Akachi Research Center, a low, dark shape against the starry sky. Lekan led them along the perimeter to the spot from the schematic. The drainage culvert was a concrete tube half hidden by overgrown weeds, the air thick with a chemical tang. Obasi produced heavy bolt cutters and snipped through a rusted iron grate. "It's 2:15 a.m., he whispered, handing out night vision goggles. "The filtration system should be offline for another hour and 45 minutes. If we're not out by then, this pipe will flood with corrosive chemicals. We go in, we find the brother, and we get out. No deviations." The crawl was a claustrophobic nightmare. Lekan followed Obasi into the pipe, the space shockingly tight. They moved on hands and knees through a slick of cold, foul-smelling residue, the world reduced to the eerie green glow of their goggles and their own ragged, echoing breaths. The pipe was a perfect amplifier, turning every scrape of a knee and gasp for air into a deafening noise. It felt like being buried alive, a slow, miserable journey through the building's foul intestines. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Obasi stopped. "We're here," he breathed into the comms. Ahead, a vertical steel grill blocked their path. Beyond it, Lekan could make out the shapes of pipes and machinery in a cavernous sub-basement. They had made it inside. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. Obasi readied a small hydraulic tool to pry the grill open, but he paused, holding up a hand for silence. He peered through the bars, his body going rigid. He slowly lowered the tool. "What is it?" Abeni whispered into her comms. "What's wrong?" Obasi backed away from the grill, his movement slow and deliberate. He looked back at them, his eyes wide in the green glow of the goggles. "We have a problem," he breathed, his voice tight with alarm. "The lab isn't on standby. There are 2 men down here. They're armed." The whisper echoed in the tight metallic space, sharp as a shard of glass. Armed. Lekan's blood went cold. This wasn't part of the plan. The entire mission was predicated on a sleeping building, a skeleton crew. Instead, they'd crawled directly into a hornet's nest. Through the grill, he could see them. 2 men, not in security uniforms, but in dark, functional gear. They wore boots that made no sound on the concrete floor and carried compact submachine guns with practiced ease. They weren't guards. They were soldiers, and they were moving with a predatory stillness, their eyes scanning the shadows as they loaded large, sealed biohazard containers onto a heavy-duty pallet near a freight elevator. "They're not patrolling," Obasi breathed back. "They're staging, loading out." Lekan's eyes locked onto the white containers, his heart seizing. He remembered the line item from the shredded documents. Transport and disposal contract. Biowaste Class 7. The pickup wasn't scheduled for 6 a.m. It was happening now. "That's it," Lekan whispered, his voice tight with dawning horror. "That's the transport." Adeoye moved up the timeline. As soon as you called, he initiated the protocol. "Asset liquidation," Abeni hissed, the corporate euphemism tasting like ash in her mouth. They were no longer breaking in to find proof. They were trying to stop a murder in progress. The ticking clock wasn't the 4 a.m. sanitation flush anymore. It was the closing doors of that freight elevator. "We can't get through here," Obasi stated, the finality in his tone chilling. "They have a clear line of sight. We'd be cut down before we took 2 steps. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at Lekan's mind. They were trapped. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to see the blueprints he had studied for hours. He wasn't a soldier. He was a janitor. He saw what they didn't. "The shaft," he breathed, his voice urgent. "The lab supply dumbwaiter. On the schematics, it was 20 yards to the left of our position, on the north wall. It runs vertically through the whole facility." "It's a cross-open floor," Obasi countered. Create a diversion, Abeni commanded, her mind already calculating. Something loud. Obasi calibrated a small electromagnetic device. I can overload the junction box for the lighting grid in the east corridor. It'll be a flash and a bang. It should draw them both. You'll have one shot. Be ready. He aimed the device through the grill. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. A brilliant blue-white flash lit up the far end of the basement, followed an instant later by a percussive crack and the sound of shattering glass. The two armed men spun around, weapons raised, shouting to each other as the corridor was plunged into darkness, alarms beginning to blare. Go! Go now! Obasi yelled, kicking the grill open with a single powerful stomp. They scrambled out, a chaotic tumble of limbs onto the cold concrete. For a moment, Lekan was frozen by the sheer exposure of the open space. Then Abeni grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. Lekan! Move! They ran, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The 20 yards to the north wall felt like a mile. Lekan's lungs burned. He could hear the men shouting behind them. He slammed into the wall, hands slapping against the cool steel, searching for the dumbwaiter door. He found the recessed handle and pulled. Locked. A beam of light from one of the men's weapon-mounted flashlights sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the floor toward them. Obasi was there in a second, jamming a pry bar into the seam. With a screech of protesting metal, the door popped open. He shoved Lekan and Abeni inside the cramped, greasy-smelling box. Get going, he ordered, squeezing in behind them and pulling the door shut just as the flashlight beam hit the wall where they had been. Plunged into absolute darkness, Lekan fumbled for the control panel and slammed the UP button. With a violent lurch, the dumbwaiter began its slow, grinding ascent, the chain mechanism screaming out their location. Medical wing is on the 3rd floor, Lekan whispered. We're almost there. The dumbwaiter shuddered to a halt. Through the thin metal door, they could hear the squeak of rubber wheels on a polished floor and a low, urgent murmur. Obasi slowly, carefully pulled the door open a fraction of an inch. Through the crack, Lekan saw a brightly lit, sterile white hallway. Moving down it, away from them, was a gurney pushed by 2 orderlies in surgical scrubs. A still figure lay on it, completely covered by a white sheet. Dr. Adeoye walked beside it, looking at his watch. Abeni saw it too. A choked, strangled sound escaped her lips, a single, horrified word that was both a question and a prayer. Kelechi? Abeni lunged for the door handle, a raw, guttural cry building in her throat. Obasi caught her, his hand clamping down on her shoulder like a vice, pulling her back into the shadows of the dumbwaiter. No, ma'am, wait, he hissed, his voice a blade in the darkness. We're exposed. They'll kill us all. That's my brother, she choked out, fighting against his grip, her eyes locked on the gurney as it neared the freight elevator at the end of the hall. Lekan watched, his own heart in his throat, as doctor. Adeoye pressed the call button. The massive steel doors slid open. The 2 orderlies pushed the gurney inside. Adeoye glanced one last time down the empty corridor, a thin, satisfied smile on his face, before stepping in after it. The door slid shut with a heavy, final thud. It was over. They were too late. A strangled sob escaped Abeni. She slumped against the wall of the dumbwaiter, the fight draining out of her. All of this, the risk, the fear, the desperate crawl through the filth, for nothing. No, Lekan said, the word quiet but firm. Abeni and Obasi both turned to him. In the dim light filtering through the crack in the door, they could see his eyes were narrowed, his brow furrowed in thought. What do you mean, no? Obasi demanded. It's a decoy, Lekan said, the pieces clicking together in his mind. It has to be. He was spooked after your call. He'd expect you might try something. Why move your most valuable asset through the main monitored hallway? Why the sheet? Why not a secured body bag if it's supposed to be waste? He's creating a ghost signal, a false trail on the security logs for anyone who comes looking later. Abeni looked up, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in her eyes. She clung to the logic, to the possibility. He wants it to look like my brother left through that elevator. But he's not in there. He's still here, somewhere else. Galvanized by the new possibility, she pulled out her tablet, its screen bathing the small space in a bright glow. She pulled up the third-floor schematic. He'd need a place that's secure, isolated, and off the main camera grid, somewhere with a different way out. Her finger traced over the neat boxes of labs and patient rooms. Lakin leaned closer. Not a new room, an old one, somewhere forgotten. His finger landed on a large, grayed-out section at the far end of the wing, labeled in small, archaic text, Surgical Theater 3, Decommissioned. There. It's an old wing. They wouldn't have bothered upgrading the security systems. It probably has its own service elevator, an old one that goes straight to a basement loading dock. Abeni zoomed in. He was right. A thin line on the schematic indicated a small, isolated elevator shaft, disconnected from the main building network. A ghost exit, she whispered. Just then, the freight elevator at the end of the hall chimed, its doors opening again. Adeoye and the two orderlies stepped out, without the gurney. They headed back down the hallway, their job done. Now, Obasi said, his voice low. Now we move. They slipped out of the dumbwaiter into the sterile white corridor. The air hummed with the quiet thrum of machinery and smelled of antiseptic. Every sound was magnified. They moved like shadows, pressing themselves into a dark alcove as Adeoye and his team passed the other end of the hall. Lacan watched the doctor's calm, purposeful stride and felt a chill. This was a man without a conscience. They reached the corridor leading to the decommissioned wing. It was darker here, the lights spaced farther apart. At the end of it was a set of heavy double doors made of steel with a small wired glass window showing only darkness beyond. Next to it was an electronic keypad, its single red light glowing like a malevolent eye. Obasi examined the lock. Magnetic seal, encrypted keypad. I can't bypass this without a plasma cutter or a lot more time than we have. They were stuck. A few feet of steel and a password separated them from Kalechi. Abeni pressed her ear to the cold metal of the door. She could hear a faint rhythmic beeping from inside. A heart monitor. He was in there. He was alive. Lakin's eyes scanned the wall around the door, his gaze catching on a small, dusty metal plate near the floor. The lettering was faded, but he could just make it out. Emergency Atmospheric Purge Control. He'd seen panels like it in old industrial buildings. It was a relic. I can't open the door, he said, a new daring idea forming in his mind. But I think I can make them open it for us. He pointed to the panel. This is a manual override for the room's ventilation. In old surgical theaters, if there was a chemical spill or a gas leak, you could trigger a purge. It would suck all the air out of the room and vent it outside, replacing it with a sterile saline nitrogen mix. The people inside would have about 30 seconds to get out before they suffocated. Obasi stared at him, a look of horrified admiration spreading across his face. Abeni's expression turned to ice. Adeoye is a monster, she said, her voice a low, vicious growl. Let's see how he likes it when his own lab tries to kill him. The old screws groaned in protest, their threads rusted and stiff. Lacan's fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the multi-tool. Every turn felt agonizingly slow, amplified by the steady, fragile beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor coming from the other side of the door. It was the sound of a life hanging in the balance, a life they were about to gamble in a desperate, reckless play. The last screw came free. Lacan pulled the dusty panel off, revealing a simple, brutal mechanism inside, a heavy insulated red lever set in the off position. Below it, a faded decal read, "Caution. Activation will result in total atmospheric expulsion." This was it, the point of no return. Lacan looked up at Abeni. Her face was pale in the dim corridor light, but her eyes were burning with a cold fire. She gave a single sharp nod. Lacan gripped the lever with both hands, his muscles straining, and pulled. There was a heavy, satisfying clunk as the lever locked into the on position. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a deep, powerful hum began to vibrate through the floor, the sound of immense turbines spinning to life somewhere in the bowels of the building. A single strobing red light above the steel door began to flash, painting the corridor in silent, rhythmic bursts of crimson. From inside the room, the placid beeping of the heart monitor instantly became a frantic, high-pitched shriek. A muffled shout of alarm and disbelief followed, then the sound of crashing equipment. The keypad on the wall next to the door lit up, beeping furiously as someone inside tried to override the purge. Code after code was rejected. With a sudden sharp hiss of escaping air, the magnetic lock on the door disengaged. The heavy steel door was flung open from within, and Dr. Adeoye stumbled out into the hallway, clawing at his collar, his face a mask of purple-tinged panic. Right behind him was another man, older, with thinning gray hair and the terrified eyes of a rat trapped in a flooding sewer. Dr. Corbin V. Okoro. They gasped in the hallway air, their lungs burning. Then they saw who was waiting for them. Adeoye's panic instantly morphed into incandescent rage. "You!" He spat at Abeni, his voice a ragged gasp. Before he could take another step, Obasi moved forward, a shadow detaching from the wall. The sound of his suppressed pistol being drawn was a soft, deadly slick. "On your knees," Obasi commanded, his voice a low, flat line of authority. "Hands on your head." Now, Okoro crumpled instantly, whimpering as he dropped to the floor. Adeoye hesitated, his eyes blazing with hatred, but the cold, unwavering barrel of the gun aimed at his chest made the decision for him. He slowly, shakily, knelt beside his partner. Abeni didn't even glance at them. She pushed past, her entire world narrowing to the open doorway. She stepped into the decommissioned surgical theater. The room was a sterile nightmare of stainless steel and dark glass, the air thin and vibrating with the thrum of the purge system. In the center of the room, on an operating bed, lay her brother. Kelechi was terrifyingly still, his skin the color of old parchment. A web of tubes and wires connected him to a bank of monitors that screamed with alarms. Abeni rushed to his side, her hand hovering over his, afraid to touch him, to break him. "Kelechi," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here." Behind her in the hallway, Adeoye began to laugh, a high, unhinged sound. "You're too late," he screeched, his voice echoing. "You have no idea what you've just interrupted." That final protocol was delicate. "You've killed him." Abeni ignored the ranting. She stared at the machines, at the IV bags dripping fluids into her brother's veins. The heart monitor's alarm was deafening. He was crashing. The purge, the shock to his system, it was too much. Lekin stepped into the room behind her. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't understand the complex machinery, but he was a janitor. He understood systems. He saw order. And more importantly, he saw what was out of place. His eyes scanned the array of IV lines. Most were standard clear bags with printed pharmaceutical labels. But one was different. It was a smaller, unlabeled bag of dark, amber-colored fluid, its tube a different gauge from the others, connected not to the main IV stand, but tucked away, almost hidden beneath the gurney. It looked like an afterthought. A secret. "That one," Lekin said, his voice cutting through the noise. He pointed. "Miss Langston, that bag. It doesn't belong." Abeni's eyes followed his finger. She saw it. Without a second's hesitation, she reached down and ripped the needle from the port in her brother's arm, tearing the tube free. The amber liquid dripped onto the white linoleum floor like poison. For a moment, the frantic shrieking of the heart monitor continued. Then, miraculously, the rhythm began to slow. The sharp, panicked peaks and valleys on the screen began to soften, settling into a steadier, weaker, but distinctly regular beat. Beep, beep, beep. Abeni stared, her hand pressed to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Lakan had just saved her brother's life. The shared moment of relief was shattered by a new sound, the thud of heavy boots running down the main corridor. Shouts. The armed cleaners from the basement, alerted by the alarms, were coming. Obasi glanced from his two prisoners to the open doorway, then back to Abeni, his face a grim mask. "They're here," he said, "and they're not going to knock." The heavy steel door shuddered as something slammed into it from the outside. Then again, a coordinated rhythmic boom that echoed the frantic beating of Lakan's own heart. "Barricade it!" Obasi commanded, shoving Adeoye and Okoro toward the far wall. "Now!" While Obasi zip-tied the prisoners' hands with brutal efficiency, Lakan and Abeni threw their weight against a heavy, wheeled bank of defunct medical monitors, rolling it in front of the door. The ancient casters screamed in protest. The door buckled again, a small dent appearing in the steel. It wouldn't hold for long. "They'll breach it in 2 minutes, maybe less," Obasi said, his voice grim. He checked his weapon, the slide clicking home with deadly precision. "We need another way out." "The service elevator," Abeni said, her eyes already scanning the room, remembering the ghost exit from the blueprints. "There." Lakan pointed to the back of the theater, behind the main observation gallery. A wall of obsolete stainless steel autoclaves and sterilizing units stood like silent sentinels. "It has to be back there." Another thunderous crash against the door sent a spiderweb of cracks through the small, wired glass window. They could hear muffled shouts, orders being given in the hallway. "Abeni, get your brother," Obasi ordered. "Lakan, with me. We clear a path." The next 90 seconds were a blur of frantic, desperate action. Abeni disconnected the essential monitors, her hands surprisingly steady as she transferred Kalechi's IV drip and the portable heart monitor to the gurney itself. Her brother remained unconscious, oblivious to the chaos erupting around him. Lakan and Obasi shoved the heavy autoclaves aside, muscles straining, the screech of metal on linoleum grating in the enclosed space. Behind the last unit, they found it. A narrow, unmarked metal door flush with the wall. There was no keypad, only a simple, heavy-duty latch and a small, grimy panel next to it labeled Maintenance Override. "They're using a battering ram," Obasi grunted, glancing back at the main door, which was now visibly bowing inward. 15 seconds. Abeni wheeled the gurney over, its wheels catching on the uneven floor. "Lakan, the elevator! Can you get it working?" Lakan pried the override panel open. Inside was a mess of old, thick wires and a large, rusted manual lever. It was a power disconnect. "It's completely offline," he said, his heart sinking. Boom! A hinge on the main door snapped with a percussive crack, the door slumping inward. "No time for a rewire," Obasi yelled. He aimed his pistol at the lock on the service elevator and fired twice. The shots were deafening in the enclosed room. The lock shattered. He kicked the door open, revealing a dark, greasy elevator shaft. The car was right there, level with their floor. "Manual crank," he said, pointing to a large, spoked wheel on the wall inside the shaft. "It's our only shot." Just as he spoke, the main door burst open with a scream of tortured metal. 2 men in black tactical gear stormed in, their weapons sweeping the room. Obasi opened fire, a controlled 3-round burst that dropped the first man. The second dove for cover, returning fire, the air filling with a deafening roar of automatic weapons and the sharp smell of cordite. "Get him in the elevator!" Obasi roared over the gunfire, laying down, suppressing fire. "Go! Now!" Lakan and Abeni pushed the gurney into the small, dark elevator car. It barely fit. Okoro and Adeoye, the 2 prisoners, huddled in the back corner, whimpering in terror. "Obasi, come on!" Abeni screamed, her hand outstretched. More armed men were pouring into the room. Obasi was backed into a corner, exchanging fire, a single man holding back an army. A bullet sparked off the metal wall near his head. He glanced back at the elevator, his face grim, a silent apology in his eyes. "There's no time," he shouted. "Get him out of here, ma'am." "That's an order." "No!" Abeni cried, her voice raw. "I'm not leaving you!" Another volley of bullets ripped through the room, chewing up the wall where they stood. Lakin saw the look on Obasi's face. It wasn't a choice. It was a sacrifice. For Kelechi. For Abeni. Acting on pure instinct, Lakin slammed his hand against the elevator's control panel. He found a large, greasy button under a cracked plastic cover that read, "Emergency Descent." He mashed it with the heel of his hand. A loud alarm bell began to clang, and with a sickening lurch, the elevator car dropped. The heavy, grill-like doors began to slide shut. Abeni screamed Obasi's name, her hand still reaching for him. The last thing they saw before the doors closed was Obasi standing his ground, his gun blazing as the armed cleaners advanced on him, their forms silhouetted by the flashing red emergency light. Then the doors slammed shut, plunging them into a rattling, clanging darkness. The sound of the gunfight abruptly cut off, replaced by the terrifying sound of their free-fall descent into the heart of the building. The elevator didn't just descend, it plummeted. The emergency brake was shot, and the car dropped down the shaft in a terrifying, semi-controlled freefall. The clang and screech of metal on metal was deafening. Sparks rained down from the cables above, illuminating the small, cramped space in strobing, hellish flashes. Abeni was thrown against the wall, her grief for Obasi momentarily eclipsed by raw, primal terror. Lacan grabbed onto a maintenance railing, his other arm thrown out protectively in front of Kelechi's gurney. Adeoye and Okoro were a heap on the floor, screaming. The fall lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. It ended with a bone-jarring, tooth-rattling crash as the car hit the bottom of the shaft, the impact so violent it threw them all to the floor. The world went dark. For a moment there was only the sound of pained groans and ragged breathing. Then Lacan's voice cut through the black. "Everyone okay?" "I'm fine," Abeni managed, her voice shaky. She fumbled for the tactical flashlight Obasi had given her. A powerful white beam cut through the darkness, revealing the chaotic scene. The gurney had tipped, but Kelechi was still strapped in. His monitors were dark. "Kelechi!" Abeni scrambled to his side, her hands searching for a pulse in the dim light. "The power's out," Lacan said, his mind already working. He found the monitor's battery backup switch and flipped it. The screen flickered to life. The steady, reassuring beat of Kelechi's heart filled the silence. He was stable. Abeni let out a shuddering breath of relief. She looked at Lacan, her eyes full of a dawning, terrifying respect. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a survivor. The elevator doors were crumpled and jammed, but Lacan found a manual release lever. With a grunt of effort, he forced them open a few feet, enough to squeeze through. They were in a cavernous, subterranean loading dock. The air was cool and smelled of diesel and damp concrete. A single bare bulb cast long, dancing shadows. This was Lacan's world. "There," he said, pointing to a large, rolling steel door. "That's the main exit, but it'll be locked down. We need another way." His eyes scanned the loading bay, past the parked delivery trucks and stacks of crates. "Plan B," he said, his gaze landing on one of the trucks. As they began to carefully maneuver the gurney out of the wrecked elevator car, Adeoye staggered to his feet. "Wait," he said, his voice a desperate, sycophantic whine. He directed his words to Lacan, ignoring Abeni completely. "You don't have to do this. You're not like her. I can pay you. I can pay you millions. And your daughter, the cure, it wasn't a complete lie. The data was just accelerated. I can fix it. I can save her. Just let me go. Let me walk out that door, and I will personally oversee her treatment." Lacan stopped. He turned to face the man who had been seconds away from murdering his savior's brother. He thought of Maya, of her sweet, trusting face, and he thought of the amber-colored poison he'd seen dripping into Kelechi's veins. "You don't get to say her name," Lacan said, his voice low and cold as the concrete floor. You don't get to talk about saving anyone. You are a monster, and you're going.